If you're in the middle, you can have two kinds of birthdays. You either go to Big Brother Ricardo's place and have a whale barbecue with him while he gives you bunny stickers for picking up after yourself, or you can go to Prison Auntie Outis's place, where she'll... With the release of the Ryoshu Capstone ID, every single House of Spiders identity now has to justify their existence in a way that no other faction has had to up to now. Cause from here on out, we always have to ask, is there any place this prisoner fits better than on Spider Ryoshu's hit list? And in Maddie Outis's case, I'm happy to say, yeah, she still gets a lot of use out of a middle team. The long and short of this idea is that the cycle of the middle is the same as ever. There is only one step, and it is counter. The only difference here is that man-child Outis plays it like a zero-sum game. Sure, she'll play nice with the other 5 in the fam until she wants something. And then suddenly, she thinks she's her adopted daughter, right down to being both the burn and bleed unit. The House of Spiders, the middle Nursefather Outis, is a blurn unit that has somehow beaten over the recent Ryoshu for having the longest kit to date. I mean, yes, they both have 3 pages, but if you take a look at her skills, you can see that they must have given it some kind of 14th giraffe bolus, because that baby's neck is way longer than it should be. So, since all these abilities are packed tighter than an orphan in a time ball, I've taken the liberty of splitting them into 3 categories. Don't worry though, we'll still keep the same format. Here's the idea. Usually, an ID has a certain flow of how it's intended to go from its base state to its strongest state. Take an early charge ID like W Corp Dawn, for instance. Her basic loop is to get charge count, wait for her skill 3, and then spend it to get about 30 clash power, which was a lot for Season 1. From there on out, you rinse and repeat, simple as that. Then as time went on, IDs slowly went from having one way to scale that power to making it more complicated, like by adding charge potency in addition to count for more gradual passive buffs. And then some of those fellas get extras on the side, like Hohenheim Gregor's IDs making their allies more powerful too. And now in Season 7, this Outis has not 1, not 2, but 3 different general ways she can get more powerful. I like to call those her sword, scaling, and support buffs. You can call those her categories, her engines, whatever feels best. But the idea is that all of her keywords and passives can be sorted into one of 3 categories which are all closely related. And we'll go over all of them just to see how you can juice the most out of this sucker. So let's start with the easiest one to explain, her parenting style. A couple of middle Outis's buffs come from her being fielded with her assigned daughter, Ishmael. When both of them are on the field, Outis gets a status called, "Check this out, kiddo," while Ishmael gets, "I got praise." Both of these keywords have the same benefits. At a high enough stack, either unit gets more final power on their base skills, and they both get general buffs to their blunt damage. I mean, if you've seen Ishmael's middle style augmentation tattoos, the benefits are nearly identical. What's also nearly identical is how these two get that buff. Pulling from Outis's innate parenting passive, both her and Ishmael will get their family fun time perks by winning clashes and hitting enemies with their skills. And both of them will get more if they win a clash with their first skill used in the turn. The only difference is that mid-male will get more compliments from Mama if she hits with her skill 3 activated from her counter, because again, the middle cycle is a circle of revenge. Just know that neither of them are gonna generate their jollies with any cracked coins, and will both lose "Check this out, kiddo" when "I got praised" if they're hit with enough skills. Now because of this, it also means this is the least reliable set of statuses to maintain, since both of the other categories in this ID get benefits from being hit. So even if you do have both middle Outis and Ishmael, I wouldn't recommend relying on letting their good times roll for long, and trust me, you will know when it's time for that to end. But before we get to that, how about we check out the part I know you're dying to unpack. Our dear Spider Buddy Outis has a total of 5 keywords related to playing with her precious Lavatane sword. This is the central mechanic that the ID revolves around, and one of the bigger goals of using this ID is to unlock the power of that sword. As such, 4 of these keywords are different stages of unlocking the sword she has over time, each of them leading to greater buffs, and eventually a fully new set of skills. Starting from the default status, we have Sealed Sword. This rusty hatchet tees Outis up with haste at turn end, makes any blunt base skills deal more damage based on the target's bleed, and offers an extra hit of blunt damage with every base scale based on the coin's final damage and the target's bleed. Right out of the gate, we already got something solid for dealing more damage, and as a heads up, most of these swords sword stage statuses read pretty similarly. So going forward, I'm just gonna focus on what's different between them. First seal removed is much the same, but also factors in both bleed and burn on the blunt base buff, as well as on the additional blunt damage. Second seal removed ain't much different other than changing that extra blunt damage to slash damage. And lastly, Lavatain is the major departure from the trend. At the start of every turn, it'll inflict burn on every unit on the field, including allies. It replaces the purple nobody's skills with a full new set that are then treated as her base skills with the relevant buffs. The blunt base skill damage buff is still the same, pulling from Blurn, and the final coin hit damage will now do pierce instead of slash or blunt. This collection is also where we get a lot of the boss fight reference buffs and costs for the ID too. We'll take a look at the skill she gets in due time, but for now, just know that she has a total of 13 unbreakable coins with Lavatain. So if it's so good, how exactly does she start peeling her special sword? That's easy. Give her disease. Rising Fever is her countdown timer for getting to each individual sword stage. Whenever Outis uses her skill 3 or ends a turn with enough NVA resin, she will count down the stack. Also, side note, I know it says NV resin in the kit, but Project Moon made a correction on their Twitter, so just know it really is A resin instead. And since it says she loses instead of gains the stack, the goal here is to get it down to 0 so that she can use her skill 3 time to unpack. Again, I won't get into it now, but man, Lei Hung is getting less impressive with every banner, huh? It's also worth mentioning that Outis' innate passive, Sealed Sword Lavatain, will make sure that time to unpack is used at combat start if there's any reason it can't be used at turn end, like moving on to a new wave. It also gives her an out to unseal the sword the first time if she's at low enough HP. That said, there is something a bit dubious about this passive. Looking at the top of the Sealed Sword passive, C-Section Outis starts every encounter with Sealed Sword. Sure, you'd imagine that's how it would work. You know what it doesn't say she starts with though? Rising Fever. For longtime viewers of the kit reviews, you've probably seen a couple of instances where the language in these kits plays some kind of shenanigans. Without going too far into it, there is no section in this kit's text where it says she gets Rising Fever, which is implied to be necessary to remove the first seal without making Outis lose HP. However, there is a sign that she doesn't have to get roughed up to start taking off the wrapping. In the Refraction Railway 6 post, there is an image of a team in one of the fights at turn 1, the very start of combat. And the reason that's relevant is because, well, I'm gonna be streaming that the day after it releases with a special child custody challenge where I'm risking losing access to my IDs for a literal year. But the other reason this is relevant is because Matthias Outis is in the frame, and right below her, we can see the icon for Sealed Sword and Rising Fever with what appears to be a 1. So this either means we either don't need to let Outis bleed out a little, or we can never trust screenshots for Refraction Railway previews again. And between the two, I'm betting on the former. I think she's just gonna have 1 Rising Fever from the get-go. Just know that she will get more Rising Fever based on the stage you unlock. While we're at it, here's what else is on Outis' Sealed Sword passive. She has a second HP threshold buff that'll give her a status called Ridiculous Grit. This buff will change any of her resistances that are weaker than normal down to straight normal, and give her a direct damage reduction buff based on her Vengeance tattoo, which we'll talk more about later. And on Clash Win, she'll get additional SP based on the Clash count. Believe it or not, this is one of the more meaningful buffs that Grit offers. Once Modus gets her Lavatain skill set, all 3 of her skills will cause her to lose SP once the attack ends. If it's a mirror of how Matthias worked, it'll be 10, which means she can go neutral most of the time. But this buff is an easy way for her to stay SP positive as often as possible. It's also why there's an effect at turn end that only activates if she's used one of the skills that costs her SP. She'll deal more damage the next turn, but she'll need to make the most of it since she loses a stack of grit at the end of every turn. So consider this more of a last stand keyword for Outis rather than her ideal form. However, we still have one more benefit from the middle mama taking it on the chin. When she gets staggered for the first time every encounter, implying she has at least 2 stagger thresholds, she'll recover from the stagger and gain a chunk of the middle grudge. Again, we'll get into this keyword later, but since it's come up a couple of times now, consider this to be similar to how it worked with Middle Ishmael. Outis' middle grudge acts as a form of middle charge count, while the Vengeance tattoos we saw in Ridiculous Grit are kinda like a middle charge potency. And rounding out the Sealed Sword passive, our walking midlife crisis here will change one of her skills skills once she has enough Grudge. At turn start, she'll transform her bottom left skill into either her skill 3, Stamp of Vengeance, or her Lavatain skill 3, Complete and Total Extermination. Once again, expect to see more about Grudge in the scaling section, but do know that if she already has a skill 3 in there, she'll wait to use this effect until she doesn't. Cause come on, why waste a good Grudge, am I right? And then that brings us to her last passive related to the sword buffs. Thanks, kiddo. After she's fully achieved Lavatain, she'll start giving her allies a great look at how it works. If an ally with low enough HP loses a clash against an enemy, she'll use her skill 3-4. Yes, she has 4 skill 3s. And this one is where the support category becomes the sacrifice category. This is her only skill that has more than 1 attack weight, and it targets both the enemy and the ally that were in the clash. We can take a proper look at it now. Good Girl, your sacrifice for the family won't be forgotten, is a blunt skill with 1 unbreakable coin that has a no reuse clause and gets final power based on the enemy's blurn. It gains more final power based on Outis' Vengeance tattoo and gets a special buff when used on Middle Ishmael because this is her easy path. The coin will ignore any resistances that would make this deal less than normal damage and sets it back to standard, inflicts blurn potency and count, and some extra blunt damage based on the coin's final damage. And then after the attack, she'll recycle her Grudge by both consuming it and gaining more, and get a bit extra if the ally burned at her stake too. Now, there isn't as clear a sign this move is going to be like Ryoshu's Team Killer and guarantee the damage is lethal. The motivation is certainly there since they gave Middle Ishmael her own HP threshold that would cause this to activate, so my best guess now is that this is either a surefire kill on allies, or one that's strong enough to be relatively easy to get when the skill is in use. In other words, weak middlings get the lava sword at Auntie Outis' house. And when the case is terminal, she'll gain envy damage up the turn after she finishes off a middle ally, or if it's Hikokomo or Ishmael, she'll get Avenging My Family, because, you know, it's what she would have wanted. Avenging My Family gives Philip but worse Outis extra damage on her envy base skills as well as final power. And while the effects are basically envy damage up but a bit better, what's interesting about this status is that, unlike envy damage up, there isn't any clear sign that this expires at turn end. Kits may hide some information on an ID before the release, but rarely will they omit whether a keyword expires or when it loses a stack. So if you're able and willing to cut your adoptive bloodline short, you can make out with a solid buff for the rest of the fight. And that's about it for the sword. She'll use this as her main way to draw out more power, juice her allies, and get a whole new set of skills. The only issue is that it comes at the cost of, well, those said allies, an easier SP generation. And while chain battles are all that are gonna help you with the ally loss, we thankfully still have one category that can offset the other downside. This section here, this is where the comparisons to charge units pay off. Outis has 2 buffs that work very similarly to charge potency and count. As mentioned, those are the middle Grudge for the count and the middle Vengeance tattoo for the potency. Grudge will cause Outis to deal more damage to any enemy that has Vengeance Mark, a staple of middle units that both she and Ishmael can inflict, and Vengeance tattoo will give her more final power for her base skills based on the stack, as well as damage buffs for her envy and blunt skills in similar measure. And if it looks like this is similar to both Check This Out Kiddo and Ishmael's own middle style tattoos, then good on you, you've already got the right idea. As far as how you get these, that is covered in 1000 Degree Knife Outis' Sin-powered passive, Book of Vengeance, the House of Spider's Claws. And it already starts out with an interesting effect. At the end of every turn, she will apply Vengeance Mark on enemies that deal the most skill damage to allies. What makes this interesting is that, while middle units will apply this on their own, this is the first ID that can apply several Vengeance Marks at once. And we know that it's several since this is the only middle kit up to now that says enemies plural. So now this can work on an opponent with several parts, or just be better for multi-human stages. She will also apply her own Book of Vengeance, the House of Spiders status on enemies at turn end that specifically damage her. And unlike with Sinclair or Heathcliff, Outis' Book of Vengeance is more like a bonus mark of death. If either Middle Outis or Ishmael hit an enemy that has it, they recover SP, which helps all the more with keeping her sanity up when Lavatain is active. The status expires at turn end, which is fine since Outis will just apply this to a new poor unfortunate set of souls for the next one. And while there are some effects related to Grudge, we'll put a pin in that just for now. Because first, we gotta go over exactly how she gets Grudge. Aside from her getting it from staggering from her sealed sword passive, Outis has 5 ways to rustle up a fresh grudge count. She'll get it when she's hit by another unit, when middle Ishmael's hit by another unit, when a separate middle ally is hit by another unit, when a separate House of Spiders ally is hit by another unit, and we'll get a fresh batch of it based on the NV resin at combat start every turn. With this many sources, I would imagine that all of these will have caps per turn, but still, you're not going to be without ways to generate your purple revenge charge count. All the more so because, once again, the middle cycle loves using counters. There's also some ways to get bonus grudge. For instance, middle Ishmael will get some grudge when Outis is hit by an attack, Outis will get an extra serving of grudge if the target she's fighting with has Vengeance Mark, and both mother and daughter will get some more grudge when they attack anyone that's left holding her personal purple book. And thankfully, that negative energy gets transmuted into more vengeance tattoos every time a skill she has consumes enough grudge. And now that I feel like I've said the G word enough that it's lost all meaning, how many skills would you guess one-armed Outis has that consume grudge? Well, if you guessed either of her counterable skill 3s, you're right on the money. It's both of the ones that she can get with her counter and the Family Friar. Once again, and I cannot say this enough, the middle cycle reigns supreme. And as for the tattoo, all but one of her 8 offensive skills will gain some kind of benefit from having her ranked up. And just so that we don't need to repeat these over and over in the skills themselves, just kidding, I will, these provide benefits such as converting coins on her default 3 skills into UBs, applying separate damage procs on several skills coins, gaining final power and additional damage based on the amount of vengeance tattoo, inflicting more bleed on hit with the skills coins, inflicting bind and paralyze the turn after the enemy is hit, and giving complete and total extermination extra coin power. In other words, while getting Lavatane does wonders, you don't want to leave these tats on the table, babies. And while this does close the book on her scaling section, we still have a couple of more generic passives that deserve attention. Let's make this quick. Smell of Blood and Fire is aptly named since it counts Toy Collector Outis as a Blurn identity, and if she's unlocked any of her sword, all of her bleed skills now count as Blurn skills. Next, for anyone that has a House of Spiders Ryoshu with no interest or means of using a middle team, Saikai the Middle has the buff she gives her daughter after she gets a taste of her own medicine. Ryoshu will gain Entanglement, take less damage, and gain offense level up when hit. Considering she's still likely to be at a disadvantage with skill slots, that's gonna pay off in one way or another. We're not clear just yet on whether the take less damage part of this is from Ryoshu's unbuff she gets from killing Nursefathers, or is something that Maddie Outis just gives her on top of that. But this one I'm willing to let ride so that we can know what to expect when Roja China releases. And then last but not least comes Outis' support passive, Someone Mess with the Family. Any allies that equipped counter skills gain damage up and protection. And if those allies are from the middle, they gain envy damage up and protection instead, likely more of one or both of these due to them matching the faction. So if you like the part of the lore where Matthias is just ostracized from the rest of the middle, then you'll probably like this passive if you want to force Outis in the backlines. And it's a decent way to help keep your middle allies alive, which, let's be real, Outis is not gonna help out with after a certain point. But with that, we have seen all 3 kinds of pipelines she can go down, and all of her generic passives. So now, how about we check out the literal longest skill sheet known to man? And what better place to start than the move you'll be using the most often, Rule Violation. This is Outis' counter and is used to allow her to get either of her skill 3s, depending on whether she has Lavatane active. Historically, it's taken 6 envy resin to allow a unit to make use of those skills, and since Outis specifically needs a resin, I'd be surprised if it would take much more than that. Other than the skill 3 transformation, this skill gives her some shield based on her missing HP, inflicts bleed, and lowers her own stagger threshold. By the middle standards, it's just what you'd expect out of a counter. Next, how about we take a look at her other odd skill out, Time to Unpack. This is the skill that Outis will use when her Rising Fever finally breaks and reaches 0 so she can start freeing her sword. This move has a reuse bag clause, 4 unbreakable coins, and inflicts blurn on the enemy, raises their stagger threshold, and inflicts envy fragility on them next turn so the middle has an easier time choosing who to target if they're not countering. As a reminder, you're only going to use this skill 3 times and unopposed. So it's for effectively a free skill? Having it do this much? feels pretty good. And since we've already covered the skill 3-4, that leaves the 3 default skills she gets and her alternative Lavatane skills. And just to clarify here, this is considered an alternative base skill set, similar to how Knight of Despair Roja has 2 skill sets. This means that any keywords that affect base attack skills will apply to both of these right now. On top of that, all the rest of these benefit in some way from Blurn being on the target. It's anywhere from giving Outis coin power, final power, or damage up. So while the middle isn't exactly known for applying a lot of bleed or burn with their kits, you can at least leave that in the back of your heads when considering Mirror Dungeon or Ego skills to bring in. With that in mind, we'll start with the moves you'll use the most often with the counter, the skill 3s. Stamp of Vengeance is Outis' default skill 3 that gains coin power and enough A resin, as well as offense level directly equal to whatever the highest resin is. And aside from the aforementioned Vengeance tattoo buffs, she will also inflict burn alongside bleed as long as at least one seal on the sword is removed. This is a trait shared by her skill 2 as well, since they both start out only inflicting bleed. Similarly, it also consumes any middle grudge she has so it can be churned into tattoos, and will give her a blunt damage up buff next turn if she got it from using her counter with enough A-res. As for the coins, those will inflict bleed potency and count, with one of the 2 count procs being on the final unbreakable coin, so, you know, it's guaranteed to go off. While it may not be the most bombastic skill in terms of coin effects, the fact that it has 4 ways to buff the ending coin value on its own means you're in pretty good hands getting this with a counter. So now let's compare that to the spicy version. Complete and Total Extermination, Lavatane, is her most powerful skill with a total of 5 unbreakable coins, extra final and coin power based on Blurn and Vengeance Tattoo respectively, extra damage from Blurn, and extra offense level based on the highest resin, just like the default version. Once again, this is the skill that uses Outis' Vengeance Tattoo to up the amount of bleed potency dealt on hit, and if you're okay with her getting 1 burn per coin before the attack starts, she'll apply these coin effects. Burn, burn count, bleed, extra slash damage from Blurn and coin damage, bleed count, more slash damage from Blurn and coin damage, and then both pierce and blunt damage based on Blurn and the coin's damage on the final coin, because she's literally kicking the sword into the target's abdomen. I know in the end it's all numbers on a screen, but when you put this together, it is the contender for the most fuck you in particular move on a kit, which I have to assume is at least a small part of why it causes her to lose SP. And then of course she still gets to consume all the grudge on herself and gets blunt damage up on the next turn if it was used by a counter. And while this is clearly the capstone move on the kit, I am very happy to report that we are not yet done with 5 unbreakable coin skills. In due time. First, we've got Bold Cut Outis' skill 2, Don't Let Something Like This Break You. This skill gains Blurn-based coin power, offense level based on the resin, and if I had to bet, I'd gamble that X is a 2. And then like with her other default skills, her Vengeance Tattoo will convert her coins into UBs, and then as a treat, she'll get some aggro to the slot next turn. Then for the coins, they inflict bleed thrice, bind and paralyze on the turn after, and additional blunt damage based on the Blurn and coin's own damage. It's a lot of bleed procs with some support and damage, which means it can be a lot of burn procs. Again, I won't expect a middle unit to stack these high, but I'm sure Mirror Dungeon is gonna enjoy that. Which brings us to Gut Stab Lavatane. Despite being the other 5 unbreakable coin skill, it's a lot more plain than its counterpart. It gains final power based on Blurn, offense level based on the resin like the other skill 2, aggro in the same vein, and hits the enemy with just about the same statuses too. Blurn potency and count, as well as bind and paralyze for the next turn. Then, as the thematic cost, she still gets burned for every coin in the skill and loses some SP for the trouble. I'm a bit curious on why they didn't factor in Vengeance Tattoo for this one. Like, I get it, Matthias didn't for this skill either, but I don't know, it just feels a little out of place. Then again, am I really gonna complain about a skill that has 5 unbreakable coins? Then we've got the skill 1s, which for any other unit would come up half the time, but with the middle, you may just use them if you can't afford to counter. Stomping is Outis' default skill 1, which gains coin power based on Blurn, has the Vengeance Tattoo coin conversion mechanic, and has the unique effect to heal SP. When you let it rip though, the skill inflicts bleed potency and count, raises the enemy's stagger threshold, and inflicts bind if you've gotten her tatted up. Notably, this skill does not have the clause to inflict burn whenever bleed is applied. However, the same cannot be said for the skill's counterpart. Her skill 1-2, I'll gut you like a fish, gains coin power based on Blurn, offense level based on the resin, and will inflict more bleed whenever it's applied if Outis has Vengeance Tattoo. Like the other Lavatain skills, she'll self-apply burn and lose SP in the process of using this skill, and the coins will apply bleed count, burn potency and count, raise the enemy's stagger threshold, and inflict both bind and paralyze if she's juiced enough to get her Vengeance Tattoos. While I know this is an improved skill, there's just something about the fact that it still costs her SP, but feels so much more underwhelming than what the other two had to offer. I don't know. Maybe chalk it up to why Envy and Comparisons are the Thief of Joy or something. So, now that we've settled up on the passives and skills, let's get a look at that vision board! As mentioned, the middle counter cycle is the best way to handle piloting this ID. But if we try to shove Outis into this family, it starts to look more cramped than anything, doesn't it? And that's how it really works. If she isn't being harvested for string, her best environment is with the middle, even if it'll soon be their worst environment later. So since it's a little more complex, we're gonna split this board into 3 phases and 3 pages. If you've been following along by now, you can pretty much tell what phase 0 is about. Counter gets you nearly anything you could ask for with this ID with A-Res, and you'll get some slight familial buffs by having both Ishmael and Outis on the field. Then the actual path is all about getting to Lavatain, all with Envy A-Res. It's a solid counter unlock rinse repeat system for a handful of turns until her sword hand finally loses control. And at the same time, you'll get both grudged by you hitting or your team being hit. So expect it to get up almost automatically, especially with A-Res. And if you're a true devotee to this one little trick, you'll get Outis' Vengeance Tattoo, which, again, buffs nearly all of her moves. And then we end with phase 2, because even if she is a Nursefather, she is still a middle unit and ultimately a simple creature. Well, if you ignore the imposing walls of text, that is. Once you get Lavatain, you're now a danger to everyone, including kinda yourself. Everyone on the field will start to get burned by the blade just being out, and if any of your allies look like they're ready to harvest, you can either lean into it for Outis' family meal of 1, or you can use Healing Ego to keep her at bay. Her I'll Go for Scissors Ego is a pretty easy option for that since it's cheap and uses both Envy and Lust, but you'll likely need a backup in order to keep both Outis using your skills and everyone staying alive. Also, just for fun, if you really want to lean into the burn side of things, this ID can technically get Dark Flame if she uses the Magic Bullet Ego's passive. It's very much a personal achievement rather than a really good strategy, but hey, what's life without a little bit of fun? Speaking of fun, if you've just given up on being a parent, then you can at least break off a piece of a homemade Ish-kebab and trade in your morale buffs for Avenging My Family. And after that, you're really just free to turn her into a Firestorm that'll only need to maintain SP by targeting anyone that hasn't returned her Book of Vengeance, and keep her tantrum going by gritting her teeth if it comes down to it. All in all, this ID plays like that one relative you never want to invite over to the family gathering for long. Sure, they can be fun for the first moment, but will monopolize the team and take all of the middle benefits without giving anything back. Don't get that twisted though. It makes for an extremely promising ID. Now all we gotta do is address... You know, I might have to rename this segment to something like What to Watch Out For, since Project Moon has been great at making really solid identities this season. A part of that is absolutely because we're getting IDs from some of the most powerful characters in the story to date, such as the Plan, but even then, some of my more recent warnings about IDs aren't usually as founded, especially with the Nursefathers. So instead, I'm not gonna be nearly as pessimistic here. You'll want to watch out for exactly how much Envy A-Resin she needs for her counter to proc her skill 3, and how much Rising Fever she gets with every unseal, so that you can tell how reasonably quick you can get to Lavatain. If I had to guess, both of those numbers are somewhere around 6 A-Resin or 6 total turns, just based on the other Nursefather ults. Maybe add or subtract 1 in either direction. And aside from that, just watch for how low an ally's HP needs to be in Thanks, Kiddo, for them to make the cut for her. That is gonna be your danger zone. On a more positive note though, we've got some good news about this ID's Clash power. I felt it was high time to go over the skills of the past 3 Nursefathers, and while I've been using 15, 20, 25 as minimum values for Clash powers recently, surprise, surprise, the Nursefathers are typically higher than that. If I factor in all the buffs the identities can get on their own, then the minimum values across all 3 of them for their skills 1 through 3 are instead 18, 25, and 26. Again, these are the worst top potentials for each of the skills, so that raises good signs for our latest 2-time empty nester here. Overall, it's a very promising ID, and I'm looking forward to seeing if she appears as an NV P.E.K.K.A. in Refraction Railway 6. Again, expect a blind challenge run of it on Thursday at 2 p.m. CST. I'll be giving myself a permanent debuff every few turns. And now, let's get to the member and patron segment. Alright, I gotta be quiet with this one because there's a cat in my lap and I do not want to disturb him, but very important announcement. This June, I am running several Pride Month streams and need your help. One is a Hear Me Out tier list with 2 other creators, Shenpai and Volpixie, who notoriously know very little about Project Moon characters, but are also much more experienced with Hear Me Outs than I am. So because of that, I am taking your best Hear Me Out pitches using the link in the description below for this stream. Doesn't matter if it's an abnormality, distortion, machine, monster, whatever have ya, anything from Project Moon other than your basic bitch human characters. If you make your pitch and fill it out in the form in the description, you got a chance of having it appear in the stream itself and having it go on the tier list. And you can get more info about the charity fundraiser on the Absolute Pride Resonance Twitter and Blue Sky pages because there are dozens of PM creators participating this year. I got links to those in the description below. We are going to have a ton of events, and either way, I'll see y'all at the railway soon. Laters!